All right, what is up, everyone? This is Speed Truth Sports. I'm Bert, and I'm joined by,
Sparsh.
Trey, as always.
and today we're going to be talking about who was the more disappointing one seed, the Utah Jazz in the West or the Philadelphia 76ers in the East. Now, the Jazz lost in the second round to the Los Angeles Clippers in 6 games, and the Philadelphia 76ers just lost in 7 games to the Atlanta Hawks. Sparsh, I'm gonna let you kick this off. Who do you think has been more disappointing as the one seed?
While I'll start off with like Utah first, sort of make a case for that, and then also probably go on into Philly as well, because there's probably more we could talk about with Philly. But the thing is like with Utah, right? Quinn Snyder last year, he came off of a series where he blew a 3-1 lead to the Murray and Jokic Nuggets, right? And we're sort of seeing that same thing happen here this series, where they had an advantage over the Clippers, right? They were up 2-0, and then they pretty much get reverse swept. And I was watching those games, and I noticed that like the Clippers were able to beat the Jazz easily because it was just the same thing over and over again. Like Quinn Snyder was not able to adjust at all, right? The Clippers, heading into the playoffs, they are the best team at 3-point shooting, right? And they went small ball pretty much most of the time because they don't really have like a mobile center, right? I mean, you don't really need one because what they would usually do in that game, right? Just go straight into the paint, then just drive it out to the three, right? You got Jackson, then you got Morris, and you also had Terrence Mann who was going off, and PG, and then Kawhi, right? They could easily make the three, and people are slandering Rudy a lot for this, but I personally think that it should also be more like Quinn Snyder because he wasn't able to adjust for that situation a lot. You see Rudy like he's like right in the paint, and then once they dish it out to three, he has so much distance to cover, but he's unable to make it because he's not really agile for his height, and that same thing kept on happening over and over again. And then there's also that situation where you have you have a home game. Kawhi is out with some sort of knee sprain, right? And knee sprains are usually correlated to like ACL injuries, right? So that's pretty concerning. Like, it looks like he was definitely out for that series. But
He's
then
still in.
again, you had somebody else step up on the Clippers, right? Somebody else going in. And then again, he's just not adjusting to that as well. I remember in game 5, the Jazz went off on such a hot like shooting streak. I believe they made like 15 out of like 18 threes in the first half. And then after that, they finished like their 3-point 20 out of 53, right? And it sort of reminds me back to like that the Houston days, with Harden and Chris Paul. I remember that series. I don't know what year it was off the top of my head, but they missed like 27 straight threes, right? And the Jazz are like an example of this live by the three, die by the three team. And they haven't been able to make those shots. Quinn Snyder hasn't been adjusting, and that was sort of like the biggest downfall for their franchise. And he's choked a couple times, but then we can also make a case for Doc Rivers and his history as well. And I'll let Trey sort of go into that.
Well, actually,
Oh no,
before we get into that real quick, I do want to say to kind of defend Quinn Snyder a little bit. He's kind of forced to play Rudy Gobert even if he's at a mismatch, because not only is he their highest paid player, but he's one of their all-stars, the defensive player of the year. He's kind of his hands are kind of tied behind his back. He kind of has to play Rudy Gobert. If he doesn't, then Rudy Gobert's gonna start complaining. The locker rooms are gonna start getting toxic. A whole mess and whole slew of things will happen. So even though he didn't make that many adjustments, you're right, he could have made adjustments elsewhere. I feel like his hands were tied behind his back with Rudy Gobert.
Yeah, there is some sort of like levy, right? Like I don't really know like sort of what else you could really do in that situation, because you take Gobert out, then who's your big man there, with like the rim presence, right? And also credits to Rudy, because of Rudy, like the Jazz are the number one rebounding team as well. But it's just that small ball, like was just able to dismantle the Jazz so easily, right? And the Jazz, they go so hot from the three in the beginning, but then after that, they just really start to cool off right after. They played really fast throughout this like series, and they just haven't really been able to slow down and sort of take control of the game as well, right? That's also another reason why they just really blew this series, which I honestly expected them to win, especially when Kawhi went out too, because I never saw like somebody like Terrence Mann being able to drop like 39 in another game, especially when, prior to that, he was just averaging like single digit points.
Yeah, and like I think some of that was definitely Mike Conley being out. I mean, you could tell how much the team missed his presence. He was a big scoring asset for them in the regular season, but Donovan Mitchell was also playing injured, and towards the end of those games, a lot of people were making fun of him because he was airballing constantly. But I mean, that man was hurt, and he's not a shooter. Like, that's not his game. So
Yeah, and to add to that, right, like with the loss of Conley, right, now you have to run the offense a lot more through Donovan Mitchell, right, and then with Conley there, Mitchell is definitely relieved more off ball and be able to space the floor out better. But I guess we could say that with Schneider, it's like it's not being able to make the proper adjustment. It's just the injuries have also been such a terrible thing to happen, right? Even though it is part of the game, but it really derailed this team during this playoffs. Right?
yeah, and all those threes that Donovan Mitchell was taking towards the end, I feel like Bojan Bogdanovic should have been taking those because he was making them. But Trey, how do you feel about this Jazz team?
For me, the Jazz, when I saw them lose their first game against the Grizzlies, I kind of knew, like, I'm not going to say I knew they were done, because obviously Mitchell didn't play a game, and then once he came back, they pretty much gentlemen swept the Grizzlies. I just felt like, for me, the Jazz just wasn't a deep enough team to go beyond to the next level. Um, you know, Mike Conley, he's a very important part of their team. I mean, I can say he's officially an all-star. He's pretty much their main facilitator. A lot of the offense runs through him, and he's such a good veteran presence, and he knows the game. He's such a seasoned player, and he's really pivotal. And it really showed that he was really important to that team. Him not being there for most of the Clippers series, definitely played a big factor into why they lost. But I think when Kawhi went out, I feel like, just like Sparsh said, we all kind of assumed that this is their time to take advantage of him. And Game 5, it seemed like, oh, the Clippers are definitely going to lose. The Jazz were going off. They were crazy. But then they just burnt out, and the Clippers just came back, and everything just clicked at the same time. Everyone, this whole playoff series, everyone's giving Paul George a hard time. Pandemic P, they call them pretty much everything in the books. Now they're calling him Pfizer P, and and now he proved himself, and I'm glad he did. Good for him. But the Jazz is the 1 seed, the best record in the NBA. We all have to take that into consideration. They had the best record in the NBA, and they just burnt out so poorly. And I think what kind of summarized the series for me was Terrence Mann getting 2 posters in back-to-back games on Rudy Gobert, and I just felt like that should have never happened. But at the same time, the Clippers, I've been saying this for a long time, the Clippers are the deepest team. They have the deepest roster in the NBA. And Tyronn Lue definitely, unlike Doc Rivers, took advantage of that. There's a lot of great players, a lot of players ready to step up, next man up. And the Clippers, I'm glad that's their mentality this year compared to previous years, because the talent's always been there, but the coaching was not. And I just felt like the adjustments they made, and having Rondo there as the leader, off the bench as well, even though he really played that many games in that series, it was all important, And for me, I just feel like you guys said most of the things I wanted to say, but for me personally, I just feel like the Jazz, they were a little bit more disappointing. Just taking consideration, they're one of the highest scoring offenses coming into the playoffs. They were one of the highest rebounding teams coming into the playoffs. There was a lot working in their favor, but I think just a consideration of injuries to Mitchell, Conley, even Gobert was a little hurt in that last game after Terrence Mann faked him out. He was walking around a little gingerly for a while, but there was just, there was a lot of poor adjustments, a lot of missed opportunities. I felt like they probably could have played, and call me crazy, probably could have played Derek Favors as the 5, and then probably stretched the floor a little bit more. and attack to perimeters because Gobert, as tall and long as he is, he's just not fast, and he really cannot cover that much ground. And it's a struggle for them. And I don't know what's next for the Jazz. They have they have two big contracts in Mitchell and Gobert, but I just feel like I just don't know what they're going to do from here on out.
Yeah, they kind of feel stuck. Like, it's like, where do the Jazz go from here? It kind of feels like they might have to trade Gobert. I'm not sure if they will. They probably won't. But it's like, how many other ways can this team improve? I mean, they have the 30th pick in the draft this year. Will that get you maybe an okay role player? Sure, maybe. Could you draft the next, Tyrese Maxey at 30? Who knows? Maybe. I don't know. But, there's not many ways for the Jazz to really improve right now. I mean, they're, like you said, they're about to pay Donovan Mitchell. They're cash strapped. But you're right. They were the number 1 seed. They were the best team in the league, and they were in the toughest conference in the league. The Western Conference was a bloodbath. I mean, if you messed up a couple of games, you would slip down like 3 seeds. Like, it was a really tight race in the West. But like, historically, I mean, the 1 seed usually actually has a lower percent chance of winning the championship than the 2 or 3 seed. The 2 or 3 seed are actually more likely to go all the way. I'm not exactly sure why. It might just be, maybe the 1 seed's exerting too much energy in the regular season to get that 1 seed. But yeah, I mean, but typically you don't see a 1 seed lose in the second round. And this happened for both conferences this year. Like, Sparsh, do you want to go? Do you want to start on your Sixers, little Sixers tirade?
Sixers tirade, man. It's kind of like yesterday we were just slandering Ben. I guess now slander Doc, right? See, the thing is, like, with Doc, right? He's just got such a really, really bad history about him. And I know, like, the media praises him a lot, but when you really start to look at, like, the total magnitude of all the things that he's done, and with the squads that he's had too, like, he hasn't, like, coached like scrubs, right? He's had, like, really great players on his team. And, like, I just pulled up this graphic over here. There's, like, from 2009 to 2013, he had 4 chances where he was up 3-2. He blew all of those, right? Then he also blows a 3-1 lead in 2015. 2016, he was up 2-0 and loses 4 straight. Loses at Game 7 to Utah in 2017. 3-1 lead blown again last year in the bubble to Denver, who managed to come back from 2 3-1 deficits. I have no idea how, even to this day.
And I called it both times, man. Jamal Murray is the truth. Jamal Murray is the truth, man.
I actually think they had 3 double-digit leads, but that's just not. They had 3 double-digit leads in that. I was just so surprised that happened. And then even in this series too, right? When they were up against Atlanta, they had a chance to go up like 3-1, right? They blow that 18-point lead. And then the next game, they were up by 26. And I was talking with you about it. Like, after they were up by like 24, I was just like, okay, this game's definitely over.
You took a nap.
Yeah. Like, I went to like cook dinner and then like come back and I'm just like, oh my God, you got to be kidding me, right? Like, this is really happening right now. Like, the Hawks are actually making a comeback. And then after that, Game 7, it's just like, he's not putting the right players on, and like, because like in Game 6, right? Maxey, once he put Maxey in, because Ben Simmons was in lots of foul trouble over there, right? Maxey was able to sort of generate the offense a lot better than Simmons, right? I mean, we all know how Simmons has been like this playoffs, hasn't been able to score at all. But then in Game 7, he doesn't put Maxey in for much. I think he only puts him in for like 15 minutes, and he's closing the games with like George Hill and Shake Milton. And like, George Hill was like a mid-season like acquire and like doesn't play him much, and then all of a sudden he's like kind of the closing point guard.
And he barely played Shake Milton towards the end of the season, and he didn't play him much in the earlier playoffs. So he was coming in. There was a lot of pressure on Shake Milton out of nowhere to just like close the game.
It was one of the weirdest games too, because I believe there was a time where Doc had a 10-man lineup in the playoffs. I don't know why you would even like sort of resort to that. Like, usually they go like 7-man, right?
It's usually
7-8 man rotation, but then this guy went for 10. And I don't know how, and so one thing that I just recalled, I remember when they blew the 3-1 lead last year. And then went on his thoughts about like the Clippers next year with Ty Lue. He's like, you're going to see the same thing again. All right. What you see with me, you'll see with Ty Lue. But then this time, what you see with Ty Lue after, they go down 0-2 twice, Ty Lue's able to sort of make those adjustments properly, implement the zone better. And they were easily able to sort of just take care of the Mavericks and the Utah Jazz after that. And here we are, right? In this Sixers series, right? Like the Hawks, they're also missing some players as well to injury. They're missing Cam Reddish, right? And they're also missing DeAndre Hunter, right? DeAndre Hunter is like 15 points per game, right? And he's also a really good 3-and-D type of player, right? That was a really huge loss. That was a really huge loss for Atlanta, right? But still, like they weren't really able to do well against Atlanta when you got like these guys, Trey Young shooting like 29 feet, like near the logo last game, right? And then you got like Herder going off for 27. You got John Collins going like 14 and 16. Like Doc has not been really able to sort of adjust to the other guys going off, right? I mean, yeah, Trey Young, he was being defended pretty well by Simmons and Thibault, but like then when you got all these other guys sort of going off, it's like, what are you really sort of implementing here? Like it doesn't seem to really make sense with what you're kind of putting on, and also with all these crazy lineups as well.
Yeah, that's one of the biggest issues I have with Doc and with this playoff series is that Doc doesn't trust his rookies, like at all. He doesn't trust any player that's below the age of 24, like 25. You know what? Probably like 30. He doesn't trust anybody below the age of 30 with consistent like minutes. And it really hurts the team because look, this is just me, I don't think you should be playing players based on how old they are. I think you should be playing them based on who's the best, like who is going to score the most, who is going to create, who is going to help lead your team to a win. Tyrese Maxey, if Doc Rivers had let him, could have had a Terrence Mann type game. And that's how strongly I feel. I really like Tyrese Maxey. I feel like he could have had a Terrence Mann-esque game to help the 76ers, but he didn't give him that chance. And this is one of the biggest differences you see between Ty Lue and Doc Rivers is that Ty Lue is much more willing to just play whoever the best players are on the court. And so he played Terrence Mann because he was lighting it up, and he played him again, and it worked out. Right? I mean, this is, and another thing about Doc is that you're right, he's really bad at adjustments. And that's another difference between him and Ty Lue is that Ty Lue is one of the best people at making adjustments. A lot of people slander Ty Lue. Trey, I know you've been guilty of this too. Of saying
I agree.
Of saying LeBron carried him.
He did. In that game.
No. That series they do not come back from 3-1 with David Blatt as their head coach. They do not. You can't tell me.
Yeah. They'll definitely not come back with like David Blatt.
Look, I got the book. On the 3-1 comeback written by Brian Windhorst. I forgot exactly what it was called, but it's a book about what was going on in the locker room and all that. And Ty Lue was doing so much behind the scenes that nobody gives him credit for. He was doing so much behind the scenes to rally the guys, giving them hope, making it good adjustments, taking players out when they were cold, keeping players in when they were hot. He just did everything right that you could do as a coach. And look, yeah, sure, Ty Lue, he needs a few games to start getting his adjustments going. But once he has the film on what the other team is doing with him and he makes the adjustments, if the other coach isn't good at making adjustments, the series is over. We saw that with the Jazz series. Quinn Snyder wasn't making any adjustments. Ty Lue took the first 2 games, watched the film, was like, all right, I need to change this. I need to change this. I need to change this. Changed it. Bam. Reverse sweep, basically. And that's not something that Doc Rivers does. He's the other type of coach where he's just like, well, we're just going to play our game. We're just going to beat you. But you can't always do that, especially other teams directly countering what you're doing.
Yeah, you guys were giving Doc Rivers a hard time, and rightfully so. But let's not forget the fact that the Sixers players themselves kind of sold in certain games. Take it back to Game 5, second half of the game, only Seth Curry and Joel Embiid scored points. That's unacceptable. Tobias Harris had 4 points. Ben Simmons had less than 10 points. It's a team effort at the end of the day. I know the coach holds a lot of weight, but the players aren't executing on their part as well. There's only so much you could do coaching. You can't make your players make shots.
Yeah.
Ben Simmons being a bad free throw shooter, you can't coach that. I mean you can, but him not playing well, that played a big factor into why they struggled so much. That's your secondary star, and he still doesn't have a jump shot, let alone a reliable one. I think one of you guys said he didn't shoot a jumper outside of like 8 feet or so in this playoff series, and it's bad. It's gotten to a point where I mean, you guys made a whole video on it, so I'm not going to get too much on Simmons right now, but it's gotten to a point where they got to move on from him. I know they want to keep trying to say, oh, we're going to give him a jump shot, get him a jump shot. I don't know. You're this many years into the NBA. I mean, I don't know what more you can say. The players did let down a lot in the series as well. It was kind of hard to watch at times, watching them blow those leads. It was just so painful. And, I know Doc's really catching the most flack for it because of poor in-game adjustments and all that. But, the players, they also deserve some flack for that. Just bad execution all around. And, it's a shame because you would think after they got rid of Brett Brown and let go of Jimmy Butler and, all that other stuff, you'd think maybe they would finally do it. They were the 1 seed. They were a good regular season team. They were one of the best defensive teams in the NBA. I think they had one of the second they're the second highest defensive rating in the NBA in the regular season. And then look at it now, doesn't matter how good your defense is. If you can't score, you're not going to win. So it's a shame.
Yeah, you do make a good point about the players. The coach can't force them to hit shots. But to me, how I kind of view the coach is that he's the manager of the game. He has to put the team before the game in the best position to win. He has to make timely rotations within the game. He has the power to control the momentum of the game, calling timeouts, subbing certain guys in, leaving certain guys in. There's a lot that a coach has to, take care of. And I just feel like Doc wasn't putting these guys in the best position to win before the game. And I feel like in the game, he also let them down with his adjustments.
Another thing that we can sort of say to sort of support, Doc and just not really put all the blame on him, right? Like it's a team game, but also it's just like how this roster is kind of constructed too, right? Where you have Ben Simmons as a point guard, like that just doesn't seem like a position that he should play, right? Because then you got him going to pass to somebody, but then he goes right under the basket, right? And like Doc Rivers cannot even play players like Ben Simmons and Dwight Howard on at the same time, because then all of a sudden now you got like 2 guys under the basket and then you got 3 guys outside, and it's just like the spacing is kind of ruined there, right? And then like the moment sort of Simmons goes right under the basket, then you got Embiid sort of outside like the key. Either he's going to take some 3 or some like contested mid-range where he could definitely be much better in the paint as well. I mean, that we could also like talk about like the Philly off season later for some other video, but like this roster is actually like a lot more of kind of a mess than I thought it would be, right? Because in like the way that sort of the offense is run, when Simmons on the floor, they just don't seem to sort of complement each other well, right? Like the sum of the parts is greater than the whole or whatever. But like when you have Simmons and Embiid, it's just one cannot fully benefit sort of without the other, right?
I kind of disagree with you on that. I think the roster is built really well around trying to help Ben Simmons. I do agree with, I've always never really viewed Ben Simmons as like a point guard. I know he distributes the ball, and that's the stereotype for the point guard position, but I feel like he shouldn't necessarily be playing point guard. I've always seen him as more of a small forward. His height just bears that in general. Like that's, and he has so much defensive versatility and all that. We talked all about Ben Simmons on the last episode, on the last video. Go check that out. But getting back to like talking about who was more disappointing between the Jazz and the Sixers, what were your expectations for both teams going in? Because I feel a lot of people had the Jazz like losing in the second round in general to the Clippers like before the playoffs started. And I feel like with the Sixers, I feel like they were expected to have the easiest path right to the conference finals and possibly have a real chance to make the finals. I feel like the Sixers had higher expectations. So who in terms of disappointing, like, would you guys say the Jazz are more disappointing, or would you say you're more disappointed in the Sixers?
Good question. I mean, like now that I think about it, right? Because of what sort of my expectations at the beginning of all this, right? At the very beginning, I sort of expected a Jazz and Suns Western Conference finals. And I honestly thought that the Jazz would sort of make it out and go into the and go into the finals, right? But then for me, sort of what I predicted um, was that Philly would definitely make the Eastern Conference finals. But I always believed that sort of the other side of the bracket where it was Brooklyn or Milwaukee, I felt like the winner of those two would definitely make it out of the East and beat Philly within like 6. So I guess, like now that I think about it, the Jazz were probably like a more disappointment than the Sixers of this series, right?
Trey, who do you got?
I mean, if you remember in our playoff prediction video, I had the Sixers, I think, in the Eastern Conference Finals, and Jazz, I think I had them in the Western Conference Finals. So I had them in the same areas. But just watching it with context, I the Clippers and the Hawks are both solid teams. The Clippers, obviously with Kawhi and Paul George, they're always going to be competitors. The Hawks just out of nowhere are such a scrappy team, young team. The coach has a chip on his shoulder after being fired. There's so much riding for that team, and just they're having a Cinderella story right now. So, and plus they played in 2 hostile areas with New York and Philadelphia. Those are some of the most ruthless fans in sports in general. The fact that they made it out so well, and in the fashion they did, just I don't know. I want to give the Hawks a little bit more credit that I give per usual, because I'm not a big Trey Young fan, but I can't even hate on Trey Young anymore because he's balling out. Ice Trey. I really can't. I mean, he was Ice Trey Game 7. He's like 5 of 23, but hey, he still won. He got the dub, and now he's going to the Eastern Conference Finals. But I guess in the sense of disappointment, in context, after Kawhi went down, I really thought the Jazz were really going to pull it out. I felt like this was their time, and no disrespect to Paul George, I kind of felt like after a while maybe he would have burnt out and kind of just reverted back to just kind of his old ways where we hype him up and say, hey, playoff P and all that stuff, and then he just kind of fizzled out. No offense to Paul George, of course, but that's how I kind of saw it play out in my head originally. So for me, like I said, the Jazz, the best team in the NBA record-wise. They were one of the best scoring teams. They were a good, solid defensive team. There's a lot going for that team going into the playoffs, and just to see them lose in such a fashion like this, where they essentially, like you guys both said, got reverse swept. It's just bad, and I just felt like for me the Jazz were just a little bit more disappointing.
They also had such a crazy like home court as well, like the Utah Jazz. Like that's probably like the most ruthless
the wrong
court
reason.
like out there, and like to
For
think
the wrong
and to
reason.
and to see for the wrong reasons. Well,
Yeah.
well, that's they're a crazy bunch, but like just like with Kawhi out, and then these Clippers are still able to steal like a home court from them. It's just like I really did not see that coming at all. Right. I mean, at least with the Sixers, it's sort of more predictable because there's it's kind of like messy over there with the situation, how the lineup is, right? But I never really saw this coming from the Jazz, right? I did not expect them to sort of get mishandled like this so easily, right? Because the Clippers made pretty easy work of them in some games, right? Even when they were down by 20, then they just miraculously come back in the second half. And it's just a complete reverse of the tables, right?
Yeah, I also want to get one more thing in there before Bert speaks, of course. Sorry, Bert, to cut you off. But just like it's like it is the fact that they lost in 6 compared to the Sixers who lost in 7. You know, 6 games in that fashion is just it's bad. And I think it's really bad just to really think about it. Terrence Mann was the hero, and the bench players you wouldn't expect, just blew up on the Jazz. It's like people they should have taken care of were the people who went off on them the most. Paul George is always going to get his 20 plus points, efficiently or inefficiently. It just happens that way. But to have Terrence Mann have a career high 39 points, to have Marcus Morris score 25 points on them, to have all these players that you wouldn't expect, when they're down, Serge Ibaka, Kawhi Leonard, to have all those players down and then they let the bench players really go off on you. It makes you really question a lot. And, and then not like they have bad players on their bench either, because Jordan Clarkson and Joe Ingles were both in contention for 6th man of the year. The roster for the Jazz is so talented. And with Mike Conley or not, it's a talented roster. Obviously, they could have used Mike Conley for most of the series, but it's just, for me, the Jazz really let me down. And I'm not even a Utah Jazz fan. I'm disappointed in them. So it's just a shame.
It was just such a mess too. Like then you see like Pat Bev going off like from the 3 as well. It's just like, man, what are you doing at this point? Like you got Pat Bev out here just like smoking it from the 3 at the same spot too. And it's just like, man, what are you gonna do about this? They're coming back. They're coming back. And it's just like, oh wait, they're up by 10.
Yeah.
It's all over.
Yeah. I'm going to disagree. I'm going with the Sixers. I mean, the thing with the Jazz is I'm kind of penciling in the Conley injury as like all right, like if Conley's not there, they're going up against a really talented Clippers team. Like you said, they got some of the best depth in the league. And they're in the Western Conference, they're in the toughest conference in the NBA. I didn't necessarily expect them to make the finals. I didn't think they would. I had him as like a pencil into the Western Conference, but I said I could see the series going either way for the Clippers and Jazz. Meanwhile in the East, I thought the Sixers were kind of a shoe-in for the Eastern Conference Finals. I kind of I would have written that in pen. I think everyone did. I think most people just immediately like, oh yeah, like the Sixers got a really easy road to the conference finals. They'll get there, but the challenge is who they face in the conference finals. That I don't know if that was the case with the Jazz. I mean, I know a lot of people didn't believe in the Clippers team. I didn't believe in the Clippers team at first. I'll admit that. But at the same time, like they have so much talent, and no offense to the Hawks because they're a great team. I love their team, but they're a less talented team. They were missing DeAndre Hunter and Cam Reddish, 2 of their best defenders. DeAndre Hunter actually being their best perimeter defender, and they still found a way to win the series. Like that's when you really got to start looking yourself in the mirror as an organization, all the coaches, all the players need to look at themselves and be like, what went wrong here? And for me, y'all already know where I stand on it. I think Ben Simmons and Doc Rivers should get the lion's share of the blame on that. But the Jazz were kind of at a disadvantage. Meanwhile, the Sixers were at an advantage in terms of injuries. The Sixers had a full healthy roster for the most part. I know Embiid was playing with a torn meniscus, but he was still putting up, like 30 a night. He was still going out there and doing his thing, and he was pretty efficient for the most part. He had a couple games where he just wasn't good. But for the most part, the Sixers, they fielded a full group of guys. The Hawks were missing 2 rotation players, and they still pulled out the series. In a series that nobody picked them to win at all. Some people were picking the Clippers against the Jazz, but like nobody was picking the Hawks against the Sixers. Like no big analyst or no big TV person was picking the Hawks. It was all just Sixers. Yeah, they got this. They're one of the best defensive teams in the league. Their offense should have been much better. And Sparsh, I know you said that they can't really play Ben Simmons and Dwight Howard together, or Doc couldn't. But the thing is, he did, and he did it he did it a decent bit to the point where it really bogged them down. And like I said, like I think the biggest 3 factors were 1, Embiid's torn meniscus, 2, but he was still playing, so it's not as big. 2, Doc Rivers and his, not living up to expectations as the coach of the 1 seed. And Ben Simmons playing horrible, horrible basketball for the last 4 games. I mean, that was just, he didn't score a single point in the fourth quarter in the last 4 games of that series. Like, you can't do that. And I just feel like, the Sixers had higher expectations of them, or had a higher potential to be like, oh, they could make the finals. Whereas I feel like most people were like, the Jazz, maybe.
Yeah.
I feel like everyone's like, the Sixers have a good shot. Like, I saw a lot of people online talking about this. Yeah, don't sleep on the Sixers. The Sixers could do it. I mean, I never bought into the Sixers, but even I had them in the conference finals. So I got the Sixers as my most disappointing team.
I guess we could just officially say that, trusting the process is just over now. That's
the process is done.
You gotta start
if you're still trusting it, I don't know, but get to go seek some help at this point.
They whiffed.
It's not going to get any better if you keep trusting it.
I was going to say this for the Clippers as well. I think one of the reasons why a lot of people had the Jazz winning that series is historically the Clippers never made it to the Western Conference Finals. Mm-hmm. So I feel like history, everyone kind of was going along with history, like, oh, they're going to find some way to lose, not make it out, and the Jazz are just going to make it to the Western Conference Finals. That was kind of how I kind of saw it as well. And I think based off history, that's kind of how I felt, and that's why it kind of leads me into the point why I believe the Jazz were more disappointing. But at the same time, the Sixers are coached by the only coach to ever have blown a 3-1 lead in 3 different decades: 2010, 2010s, 2010s, and 2020s. So, there's always something.
I forgot to share a little group of statistics that I got this from Basketball Forever, at Basketball Forever on Instagram. They compiled a bunch of these slandering Doc Rivers stats. So Doc Rivers lost 9 Game 7s so far, and that's the most in NBA history. He's lost 5 Game 7s at home, which is the most in NBA history. He's lost each of his last 4 Game 7s, which is tied for the worst streak in NBA history. He has 29 losses in potential closeout games, the most in NBA history. His 34% win percentage in closeout games among coaches with 20-plus games is the worst in NBA history. Look, man.
That's terrible, dude. That's so bad.
I mean, if you kind of look at it from the other way, you kind of be like, well, considering Doc's history, I expected the Sixers to do this. You could make that argument, but I don't know. I feel like you said, but like earlier, I just feel like a lot of people were just talking about like Doc Rivers himself was like, Tyler will have the same problems. He didn't. Paul George was saying Doc wasn't using me right. He was playing really bad last year. Now he's playing very good. He's playing very solid basketball. He's only had a few bad games. And I don't know. I don't like how Doc conducted himself in that exit with the Clippers. But yeah, I mean, Ty Lue came in there and just picked up the slack, brought them to their first ever Western Conference Finals, and y'all need to start putting respect on Ty Lue's name. Ty Lue needs respect on his name, man.
He's definitely put his name out there. Yeah.
Yeah, he's definitely getting my respect right now. So.
All right. Well, this has turned into a podcast length episode, so I might just label it as the podcast for the week. Yeah. Thank you all for tuning in. If you enjoy this type of content, NBA talk, we're doing some NFL talk later on in the season. Go ahead and hit that subscribe button, follow us, do all that good stuff, like, share, subscribe, and also check out our podcast. This is probably going to be a podcast episode. Check out the rest of our episodes. We got some other stuff there. The YouTube channel has a bunch of videos that are separate from the podcast, and check out our website. Our website is going to have some articles up there. I'm going to be putting out a mock draft either tomorrow or the day after when the lottery is done. And yeah, that's all I really got to say. So any closing thoughts from you two?
Well, I mean, I don't know what else to really say. I mean, don't trust the process anymore. That's it. That's all. Just wanted to say that again.
I'll say this now that you mentioned Doc Rivers so much, as like, you know what, he's probably the reason. He probably contributed to most of those second round exits with the Clippers in general. So yeah, I can put a lot of blame on him when it comes to them not making the Western Conference Finals prior to this year. So
yeah, a lot of that was injury, and a lot of that was Doc Rivers. But the 3-1 lead to the Rockets, that should never.
That was Doc Rivers single-handedly. That was single-handedly him.
Oh yeah.
I'll agree with you on that one. That was,
all right. Well,
that was bad.
All right. Well, this has been Bert.
And this is Sparsh.
Trey, as always.
And we will catch you guys next time. I guess now it's officially on the next episode of the Speak Youth Sports Podcast. See you guys later.
Take it easy.